And welcome back. If you've just joined us, we are, of course, this morning starting the celebrations early because tomorrow, August the 1st, marks the 90th anniversary of SABC. And that is the corporation as a whole. And you've seen throughout the morning some of the montages that our colleagues have actually put together for you. Just walking down memory lane and remembering the good days, the not so good days, because over 90 years, we've seen, we've heard, and of course, we've felt a lot through the medium of broadcasting. And this morning, we're just taking it further, and we'll have a host of people who have walked through these hallowed walls and coming through, speaking to us and reminiscing with us about 90 years of SABC broadcasting. And one of those people who joins us right now is, of course, a writer, a broadcaster, a producer, a man whose voice and face many of you will remember fondly so. Pat Pillai, good morning.
Good morning, Sakina.
And you are someone who's been here at the SABC. You've worn several hats. But talk to us about the first time you started working at the SABC and that moment. Let's go back there.
Oh, goodness. Going back to a time of NNTV, I'm not even sure if anyone remembers the channel. It wasn't on for too long, but National Network Television was brought in just as the SABC was beginning to transform. And it was a channel that eventually became SABC3, but it was really a tiny channel that was set aside really to bring about some public broadcasting, specifically focusing on education. And that was, if I remember correctly, early 90s, 92 perhaps, somewhere there, 92, 93. Zwelakhe Sisulu had just been brought in as the CEO of the SABC, and his mission was to transform the broadcaster. And myself, Vuyo Mbuli, Tracy Going, and a few others were trained. And I'm a teacher by profession, and so is Vuyo. And it made sense for us to get involved in a little channel that was going to eventually host Teleschool and a few others. They were wonderful days, exciting times in terms of trying to find an SABC that was going to better reflect the face and voice of South Africa.
Indeed. But of course, that was a time, Pat, when we were right on the cusp of that transition to democracy. And thinking back to that time, the newsroom, what the SABC used to be, and just overall in the building, you had Henley with all the various properties of the SABC by ways of series and comedies and all sorts of things being produced there. And here you are walking in an establishment that was traditionally lily white. Talk to us about that transition period and how things changed and how people actually were incorporated into this corporation.
Well, I was in my 20s, sort of latter half of my 20s, and very much a newbie to broadcasting. I was born and raised in Cape Town on the Cape Flats, and I studied in Durban. In fact, I was relegated at the time to what we called a bush college to study at UDW, today UKZN. So I came very much from the coast and found myself then inland in Johannesburg, and that itself was a culture shock, but excitement, certainly excitement, because change was in the air in our country. And when I walked into the SABC, I certainly did experience a culture shock. I've grown up hearing so much from those buildings, radio block, or well, radio tower, and then television block as a child and as a student. And then walking into that building and meeting some of the people and understanding some of the management, the management culture at the time was an education. But true to the transition that was in place, people were trying really hard to find a way to adapt. There were some people who were resisting it, of course. Some people did resist that. But slowly over those next few years, from 92 to 94, leading up to the relaunch of the SABC with a new logo, etc., I think the culture started to adapt to a point where people recognized we need to get behind the project of finding one voice, one face for the SABC, and then for ultimately representing the diversity of our great nation.
And you were very fortunate because you were there for that political transition and having to be the medium through which the majority of South Africans would get to witness history through the SABC. And then, of course, it was ushering in the new millennium. And we know the sorts of talk that was going on at that time and all the technological advancements and, of course, the scares that went with that. And once again, Pat Pillai, you were at the center there.
One of the shows that I was involved with at the time, and I really did meet producers, writers, and management who were genuinely very kind to a newcomer to broadcasting. I remember Vuyo and I were both new, and he and I would spend time, you know, outside of live camera, just preparing ourselves and trying to apply these lessons. Adrian Steed trained us at the time, and of course, he was the broadcaster well known in South Africa for the English News Bulletin, and he worked in radio. And there were a few skills and principles he taught us that we were looking to apply. And by the time 2000 came around, you're right to remember the scare of Y2K. I happened to be involved with Sally Burdett in a show, goodness, I think it was Beyond 2000 or some technology show. I
Beyond
couldn't remember. But
2000,
anyway,
yes.
that was the show. Yeah, yeah, yes. And that was the show that got quite a strong viewership because its focus was technology. That was exciting leading into it. And then Y2K wasn't the big disaster we all thought it would be. And so began, the new century. Exciting times.
Indeed. And of course, as I said, you wore so many hats over the years during your tenure at the SABC. Let's quickly talk about radio before we run out of time. And again, just the evolution and being in this dynamic space.
I think that radio played a big role in all our lives, and in my life in particular. Growing up poor, the only medium we had access to was a battery powered radio. And my mother made sure she found money for that battery. And it was our link to the entire world. Now, this was during an apartheid era. The SABC was very strongly governed, as we know. But Springbok Radio played a role in our lives. And after school, if you sat around that radio and you had a chance to listen to Jet Jungle or later on, Mum wouldn't allow all the radio dramas to be freely heard by us as kids, but we could listen to The Mind of Tracy Dark, which terrified us. We could listen to Squad Cars. These are the men of Squad Cars, and we were in the action and loved it. And the theater of the mind around those dramas was certainly stimulated and loomed large long after Mum turned the radio off and said, go to bed or read your book or do your homework. So radio played a big role, but it was a time of analog media, Sakina. You went to movies even though they arrived late. You went to drive in later when an uncle came around with a car with sandwiches in a little Tupperware. So it was a time of analog, and radio was part of that. And then stations in Cape Town like Good Hope Radio and Radio 5, recording little snippets on a cassette when you could afford one was wonderful to play back the times. So the SABC, even though we know it has had a dark past in terms of our country and the way it supported the state, certainly still played a role in shaping our everyday experience. And when we got television very late as a family, And I always wished I could do work on radio, and I ended up doing more on SABC with SABC News and other programs. I'm always thankful to SABC for having given me those opportunities and the people who helped a youngster find his way into that world.
Well, Pat, we appreciate your contribution. Certainly had some of us watching and aspiring. So thank you so much for being part of our celebration here of 90 years of SABC. And of course, wishing you well. And we continue walking down memory lane.